Vice, directed by Adam McKay and starring Christian Bale as Dick Cheney and Amy Adams as Lynn Cheney, his wife, and Steve Carell as Donald Rumsfeld. The film was great. I really sincerely liked it. I would not say that it was a clear biopic of Dick Cheney's life. With that said, this film does document Dick Cheney's life in a very interesting way. We first see Dick Cheney drunk driving and then also getting into a fight, and it jumps back and forth between this stage in his life and when he was vice president. In the earlier scenes, we see Amy Adams' character, Lynn Cheney, slap some sense into Dick Cheney. She seemingly tells Dick Cheney to get his act together or she's gonna find someone else who's gonna be successful. And so what does he do? He gets his act together and he starts running for politics. Well, there are some other things that he has to do before that, like he gets like a really prestigious internship, you know, on the path to success, I guess. One thing I admire so much is Christian Bale's performance as Dick Cheney. Christian Bale really executes who Dick Cheney is to a lot of people, or what he seems to be, but also throwing in some other variables like his anxiety, his heart attacks, the pressure he has on him to perform really well. So all this together creates a very interesting and dynamic story. And oftentimes I found myself forgetting that this was Christian Bale under all the makeup. This is the Batman I grew up knowing. In the earlier scenes you could definitely tell it was Christian Bale, but he was just a little heavier. But in the later scenes when he started to mature and grow in age, I guess, that's when we started to see the Dick Cheney I've been used to seeing like in the news back when I was a little kid. So yes, Christian Bale did a good job executing Dick Cheney's anxiety and his stress and all the pressure he had on him from his wife, from the US government, from the American people, and his own personal desires. A fascinating aspect was the filmmakers chose to go along the dialogue that Dick Cheney did everything for his wife and his family. More for his wife, because his wife wanted to get into politics or get into somewhat of an important atmosphere. So now let's move on to the narrator. The narrator was peculiar to me. The narrator, but also just a lot of the text in the film was interesting. Because the filmmakers tell the audience right off the bat with some text at the beginning that they did their best to make a film that accurately portrays Dick Cheney's life. And I think this little disclaimer is interesting because I guess there is this element of mystery in Dick Cheney's life that is, to this day, still kind of a mystery. Because he is a man, I assume, works more privately. He doesn't like to be in the spotlight per se. He likes to have power, but he does not like to be in the spotlight. So the filmmakers chose an interesting route by saying, hey, disclaimer, you know, we did our best to make an accurate portrayal, but this might not be everything. So with this notice, I felt more comfortable watching the film and being okay with the interpretation the filmmaker went with. So yes, the film is opinionated and it is funny, but you know, the director did direct Anchorman and some others, so it would be unnatural if the film wasn't a little funny, and I think the humor made it more enjoyable, and it kind of took some pressure off and it made the film unique in that sense, because it was a little humorous. One spot I really appreciated was when Dick Cheney, he leaves politics and the credits start rolling, and it's like maybe a halfway through the film, and I'm like, okay, this is a joke. And then of course you fast forward a few years and then he gets a phone call to get asked if he wants to be vice president for George W. Bush. So it was just kind of funny. One part of the film I thought was really enjoyable was seeing Dick Cheney's life as 9/11 happened. There were so many extreme close-ups of Dick Cheney and showing him being rushed out of his office or wherever he was into a very safe location and then taking control and barking out orders while some people in the room were eyeing him like, shouldn't the president be doing this? But of course, George W. Bush was not around. So Dick Cheney took control. And I guess that's where some people have questions about Dick Cheney and his ethics. And as we know, the film centered around Dick Cheney's search for power. And this was a prime moment in his life where he had total control of the situation. Going off of that, Sam Rockwell played George W. Bush and he did a great job. Some will say that Sam Rockwell portrayed George W. Bush as a dumb person. And I can totally understand that criticism. And that was also another comedic aspect that can, I guess, go against the film. But it did drive home the point that George W. Bush wanted to surround himself by people who knew what they were doing. It does suggest that Dick Cheney and his people took advantage of George W. Bush. And that has also been up for discussion ever since the George W. Bush administration. So yes, that could be a criticism of the film, but that could also be a very important aspect of the film. The film makes Dick Cheney look like a very greedy, morally ambiguous / unethical human being. And that is open for interpretation and discussion. But I think it's important that we have these kinds of talks because especially right now with our current administration and the criticisms around the current administration and also just current politics in the US government, it is something to remember and figure out why things are the way they are. And I guess it's important to look at Dick Cheney's legacy in politics and figure out, is this right? Should we keep letting politicians be like this, or should we set better examples? I thought the cinematography in the film was really cool, but also I thought it was another downside of the film. I believe that some scenes in the movie needed to be more in focus because some scenes just look really blurry. When some characters should be in focus, they look blurry and there's no one else in focus, so maybe that's done intentionally. So overall, I thought it was cool though that most of the shots were close-ups or mid-close-ups and there were very few wide shots. And so, especially in the 9/11 scene, most of those shots are pretty much close-ups. And it made the film more tangible and realistic. I really thought that was cool. And it made me feel like what I was seeing on screen was actual footage sometimes. So awesome stuff. The editing was also pretty cool. The film was cut together in a non-linear format. So we would jump around from the, more recent events with older events in Dick Cheney's life, as I've already said. But I thought that was a really interesting approach to a film like this. And it made it interesting, and I appreciated that. I also forgot to mention earlier with the narrator, we find out that this narrator in the film, he seems like a random dude going about normal life, but then we see him get hit by a car or a truck. We find out that this narrator is an organ donor and his heart is given to Dick Cheney. And we find out that the narrator is bitter towards Dick Cheney because Dick Cheney says it is his heart, not the organ donor's heart. I guess it's symbolic that this soul, this normal person who lost his life is the one who saves Dick Cheney. I guess it gives some insight into why the narrator is so bitter towards Dick Cheney throughout the film and seems opinionated of Dick Cheney. Dick Cheney's life is narrated by a bitter person who has exceptional reasons to dislike Dick Cheney, and we now see the main reason why he dislikes Dick Cheney. And it seems comical, but like it's a very interesting way to choose a narrator. Make it the organ donor of Dick Cheney. So yes, that's the rest I had to say about the narrator. Very cool narrator, very dark though. So I also need to mention the family dynamic. One of Dick Cheney's daughters is gay, and the other daughter eventually runs for governor and comes out openly saying that she's against gay marriage. And it causes a lot of tension in the family, probably some broken ties as well. Another very heartbreaking moment. The final shots of the film were of an interview Dick Cheney has with somebody, and it starts out interview style, but then it changes to Dick Cheney turning to the camera directly and saying he does not feel sorry for his decisions in his life. He basically questions how would anybody else deal with the things he's had to deal with. Given his circumstances, he did what he thought was best in his life, and he does not feel sorry for them. His takeaway point in this last scene was that he does not feel sorry for his decisions in his life, and that he doesn't think anybody else could really know what to do better, basically. His last moments in the film seem to be like, I was put in a very tough position, but I dealt with it the way I thought I needed to. And he seems very confident. To this day, I guess, in the film, it's portrayed like he still believes in what he did, like during 9/11 and during it all. He has no regrets about it. The movie was pretty cool. That last shot was really interesting, just to see him turn to the camera and be like, I have no regrets, basically is what he says. So Yes, I'll give this film a 4.5 out of 5 because yes, the humor makes the film less of a biopic and more of an exploration of Dick Cheney's character. And that's why I give it a 4.5 though, is because it takes a new approach to historic events or people in history and throws like a humorous take on Dick Cheney. There's still very informative moments in the film. We still got a very interesting insight to Dick Cheney's life, and also Steve Carell's performance in the film was really good, and so was Christian Bale's, so was Amy Adams. They're all very good. So thank you guys for watching this, and if there are any other movies you want me to review, please leave a comment, let me know, and I'll probably get to it. So yeah, please go see Vice if you're into political dramas in a way, or history, biopic kind of deal. And it's up for quite a few awards, so it's worth your time, especially just to see Christian Bale's performance. All right, thank you guys, see you next time.